Okay, quick explanation then. I posted these images on the DAZ 3D forum of the grass textures that I've been working on, and a couple of people have expressed an interest. CRAM there, and I can't pronounce that. Haynes too. Okay, but right, the idea behind this is for a forthcoming, up and coming, whatever the word is, product by Horror and myself. We're still working on it for vegetation, ways of simulating vegetation at various distances. So this is obviously trying to deal with the foreground to midground area, and I'll just explain what's going on here. Right, there are three components to this. There's a ground plane. The ground plane is solid, and it is comprised of two repeating images that is patched together with a procedural function. So if I just turn off the grass terrain and the leaf one, so we can only see, I'll just hide those two. I need to select them and hide them. So that's it. Okay, they're hidden, and now I give that a render. You can see what comprises the base layer. Now the idea behind the patches, if in this case, is that with repeating patterns it's quite easy to see where the repeat is. So by having the two patterns at slightly different scales, so that one's at 27% and that one's at 31.7%, and these patches mixing them together, it makes it a lot harder, because this is a procedural function here that's doing the patch mixing. So it makes it a lot harder to pick out a repetition in the pattern. This image here, this was generated using Genetica and the height map, bump map in this case. I used Crazy Bump to generate it, but it's the same pattern in each case, but at slightly different frequencies. And it's parametric mapped, which means that it makes it easy to scale up or down, because you can just modify the size of the infinite plane there on that corner. So you can scale it in and out quite straightforwardly. Another component to this is that it's got ambient, which is not something I would normally include, but because we're dealing with quite a complicated subject here, the grass, light's arriving, thank you Windows, light's arriving from all different directions, and we're in an outdoor environment, so it's appropriate to have some ambient. You don't want a completely black shadow in the grass there, because it kind of spoils the effect. If you can avoid that, it's a good idea. The next layer, now the grass terrain, there is a tutorial for this on my channel, and I'll just find a link for that. Hang on a second. Okay, so I've dug this video out. Here it is on my channel if you want to find it. It's quite an advanced tutorial. It's not easy to set up this with the deep texture editor. So what we've got here with the grass terrain is a selection of blades that are made up of a function, so that they tend to draw on the vertical surface of the terrain. So what I've introduced is a spiky terrain here, and as it rises out of the surface, the illusion but the thing about this is a very expensive effect on the final anti-alias pass. It's not too bad initially, so if I'll just unhide that a second, and you can see how, because we're tending to look at the more vertical faces, and as it approaches the horizon here, it looks darker in this direction than it does when we're looking down on it, which is creates quite a natural effect as it proceeds into the distance. But you can see it's fairly slow to render, so it's a bit of an expensive effect. So if you can control it a bit, don't use it over the entire area. Obviously, for demonstration purposes, I've done it over the entire screen here. I'll just hide that again. And the other component we've got here is a leaf or flower plane. Now in this case it utilizes the same function as on the ground, so it blends more easily, but it uses a different variation of the blades function which you saw for the grass, that creates these like petals or leaf shapes, and then by using specularity you can capture that effect of the highlight. So this layer, we'll just turn this layer on now, you can see that it blends very well with the base layer, but it just adds a bit of extra highlight, and again it's there to disguise the repeating nature of the pattern. So if I take the base layer here, ground plane, and I'll just hide that now, so you can just see the effect of the leaf layer that is introduced. So you can see that it's a mixture of things. It's got its own pattern, and again this is a parametric map, so it makes it easy to scale relative to the other maps. So if you wanted to shrink them down and have smaller flowers, leaves, whatever, then you have that option. Just grab the corner. Well, it was ground plane actually, I should have had the other plane here selected. Okay, so that makes that smaller. Right, so the total combination of them all looks like that, and you'll see if I hit render now, the initial prediction is only a minute to render, but that's not strictly speaking true. The anti-alias pass, because there's such a high amount of noise in this scene, because there's so much variation in the distance, then when you hit the anti-alias pass it will slow down tremendously, and it might take 10 or 15 minutes to complete that if you've got an entire render filled with this effect. So it's okay for previewing it because you don't tend to go for a final render, so you can have it switched on and work with it in that way. You can see we're anti-aliasing now, and that it's quite slow as it's picking out these vertical shoots. It does tend to be the train with the transparency on that causes the greatest problem, but that in itself lends the greatest level of realism. I suppose I should also point out while I'm at it and talking about the train that unlike on the tutorial, this one, I didn't randomize the colours but picked the colours out according to what I thought was appropriate. So in some cases it's a dark green grass, in other cases it blends with the colours that exist within the repeating texture that was chosen. This one, or in the case of one of the others. There's a few of these I've made so far, if I can just find them somewhere. I just tend to work on a lot of things at once. Here we go. I'll pick out another one. I quite like the dry grass one. That's quite radically different to this one. If I can just find it, here we go. Okay, so you can see the effect of that is I've got the leaves, but I've also got this dry grass on the ground plane here that I suppose I can bring it up. You can see the repeating pattern here. So that's why the scale has had to change, because obviously that's quite close to compared with something like this, which is a little bit further away. So that's why you'd want to start changing the size of the things, and you've got to take account of that for the distance from the camera to have a realistic impression. So there you go. That's just a rough breakdown of the processes involved in setting up these effects. So I hope you found that interesting, and that you'll be interested in the product when we finally get it completed. Okay then, cheers now.